just use them. Oh, it is working. Then I'm
To myself.
All right, so we're going to get started here. I'm going to do my little intro. Some of you that were in the 3D Universe program probably have already seen this, so I apologize. But this is our website, Kopernik.org. You can, of course, visit us here for upcoming program information. We are doing Friday Night Family Hour at 7 p.m. every Friday. Next week is a little different. Where instead of doing our 3D Universe, we're going to do our lunar activities as part of International Observe the Moon Night. So we're hoping for clear skies next week so we can observe the moon with the rest of the world. It's a big event every year held by NASA. So then afterwards, in the following weeks of October, we will run the 3D Universe that we ran this evening. Then in November, we switched to hovercrafts, which is a fun program too, where you get to build your own little hovercraft. And we'll talk about tonight's program, of course, but if you want to see upcoming public programs, that's right at the top here. You can scroll down our list. We have a complete list through mid-December. And we do go on a break usually around the winter time because this hill, super steep, I'm sure you noticed coming up. But that is then we'll resume in the spring. So usually we're March to mid-December for regular Friday night programs. If you are able to reach Kopernik on a given day and we're running something that is of interest to you, then you can switch to our YouTube channel, which we are actually streaming this right now on our Kopernik channel. And you are welcome to follow us here and get up to date with our latest events. We don't just stream Friday night programs. We also are continuing our live stream astronomy. So for example, this is the one I used before. With the solar eclipse, we try to bring astronomical events like rare ones to you. This one happened at 5 a.m. You can see it's 5:41 there. It started around 5:20, 5:30. And so it was very early rising. Not a lot of people had a chance to view it. But we were able to go up and find a really nice low horizon and observe this happen. It was just a partial eclipse, but the next total eclipse is in 2024, coming up pretty soon, really. It'll be here before we know it. And that one will be visible from here, or at least almost. Go a couple hours north, and you'll get total eclipse.
Only in New York.
Yeah, it's a north to south path, but it sort of does come in at an angle. So it's the entire East Coast won't get this, right? Unlike the west to east before. All right. Also, last thing I always like to mention is the clear sky chart. This is your best tool to use. Of course, we try to alert you with clear sky alerts. Tonight looks, I think, relatively promising. You can see some dark blue in our cloud cover there. That's all I can hope for is getting that dark blue. That means that it'll be like 20% covered if the forecast is accurate. And the transparency is not great, so that's going to unfortunately affect our ability to see deep sky objects. But seeing is good enough that we can see the planets. The planets will come out like Jupiter and Saturn. So definitely go out to the observatory afterwards to observe those objects in our scopes. All right, so that is our website and our YouTube. I'm going to get this started here just so it's ready to go. Because we have Adam Flint from the Network for Sustainable Tomorrow. He's the director, and he's going to give a program on energy systems of the future. So I'll leave it to you, Adam.
Thanks, Jeremy. As far as sound is concerned, do I need to be anywhere different than in terms of the camera?
It should pick you up all right.
Yeah, I'm loud, so
switch this
I
over.
don't think it's a problem. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm glad you made it out here. Before we get started, I actually want to get some sense of who's in the room. So who in this room has some knowledge about air source or ground source heat pumps or geothermal? We got one in a little bit, maybe. Who here is a student? A few students. Who's from out of town? Oh, where? From out of town? Don't be shy.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
You got a whole group from Bethlehem here, or?
Yeah.
Got you, okay. And you?
Shenango Lake.
Shenango Lake, okay. All right, great. So we're going to get started here. As Jeremy said, I direct clean energy programs at our small nonprofit called Network for Sustainable Tomorrow. And I have with me virtually via Zoom Ellie Colton, our sustainability coordinator, who's going to be talking about most of the tech side of things. I expect this will take half an hour, give or take. And if you have a question as we're going, go ahead and throw up a flare. If it's something I'm going to get to, I'll just say we're going to get to that in a couple of slides. Otherwise, I'll answer it there and then. And so we should have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So let me get the clicker. Okay.
Is the clicker already?
I think it is already not. What am I pointing to?
It's a pretty good range. Let's see if I need to click on the slide here. Sometimes that's all it takes. Try it now.
You got it. Good call. All right, first a couple of words about our organization. We're based in downtown Binghamton. You know, the corner of Court and Front Street. That's where we are at in the First Congregational Church. We've been around for a little over a decade. And we basically have two big missions. One is education and outreach of all kinds, although this kind has been sadly very rare. I'm trying to remember the last time I stood physically in front of an audience. We've been doing webinars for the better part of the pandemic. And the energy work that we do is certainly to educate, but it's for a purpose of helping people get what they need to make decisions and get improvements done, energy improvements done on their buildings, whether it's home or commercial. We also work to bring together and incubate new projects. And the one I'm actually the proudest of right now is actually this has a new name, I have to change this. It's the Southern Door Land Trust. It's a new room community land trust. If you're interested afterwards, I can tell you why the name changed. Does anyone here know what a community land trust is? So a community land trust is a very elegant way of solving the gentrification and affordable housing problem. So the way it works is that this is a nonprofit organization that will buy and rehab homes on land. The land will be owned basically by the trust in perpetuity, and so they can keep the price of the house out of the market. The house can be bought and sold, right, by individuals. But it pretty much avoids increases in pricing, which normally are attendant upon improving properties. This is it's the newest one in the state. It's only been around for a little under 2 years. But I think 2022 is when we're going to be buying properties. This land trust is largely a City of Binghamton effort right now. It is pretty much managed by women of color from the city, and in that respect, it is also somewhat unique in this town, anyway. So with that, let's move on to the topic of tonight, which is not really energy systems of tomorrow, because they're here now. They're just not very numerous. People don't necessarily understand how they work. And so really our task isn't so much a technological one as a political, cultural, social, and economic one. So today I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Who knows what that is? Yeah, I was afraid of that. Problem number one. So in terms of our energy transition, people whose job is not to do this work aren't necessarily getting information of the kind that y'all need to make good decisions about energy in your life. And when I tell you that by 2040, you will not be permitted to put a fossil fuel HVAC system in your building, that might come as a bit of a shock, but it's true. And so, obviously you would like to know that well in advance, right? And as to the exact year for particular buildings, that's unclear. But we do know, and we'll go into it, that by 2050, that's going to be largely the end for fossil fuels in our state, with some minor exceptions. So the CLCPA is a landmark law that was passed a few years ago that I'll talk about. And then I'll talk about sort of the meat of our presentation today, what is environmentally beneficial electrification and why is it so important. I'll then turn it over to Ellie, who's going to get into the technology and share with you a really exciting project that she was a part of together with students from BU and faculty from SUNY Broome, basically scoping out a campus geothermal project as part of a DOE competition, Department of Energy. Barriers and opportunities, and then what we can do. All right. So the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act has a lot of goals, which you can see here. They're very ambitious, and they involve a number of aspects. So first and foremost, moving to 70% renewable energy by 2030, 100% clean electricity by 2040, and an 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels. Does everybody in this room understand what we mean by greenhouse gases? Or let me ask that another way. Does anybody not understand that? I don't want to make assumptions. Okay. Then we have a number of specific technology goals. And so when we're talking about offshore wind and solar, we're talking about electricity generation on the grid, right? Production of clean electricity. In terms of energy storage, that's going to be by and large batteries. At this point, like probably lithium-ion batteries. Who here is aware of an exciting new project involving lithium-ion batteries in Endicott? Your work cut out for us. So I know some of you from out of town. Endicott is across the river from us, north. And that facility, which is now called the Huron campus, which I think has about 2.4 million square feet or something like that, was the home of the IBM Corporation at its heyday. In '89 or so, they ditched us, went to Poughkeepsie, and then they ditched Poughkeepsie. I've lost track of where they are now. But the facility has bounced back somewhat, and we had some exciting announcements over the last few months. First, Imperium 3 is building a gigafactory in part of that large facility. And their goal is to produce 1 gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts of batteries in the first couple of years, and then ramp up to more and more and more. This will create jobs, and one of the exciting things about this is that the chemistry of those batteries is new, is based on work that ultimately came from the work of Stan Whittingham at Binghamton University, who is BU's, I think, only Nobel laureate. He won a prize in chemistry a few years ago. Is that a hand going up that I saw there for a minute, or no? No. Okay. So there's going to be jobs and there's going to be battery production there. And because of the chemistry of this battery containing no nickel or cobalt, these things aren't very flammable. They're not as expensive, and they're actually more energy dense than conventional batteries. Yes, sir?
Are they recycling, building from scratch, or both?
Recycling batteries, they are not. They're building from scratch.
What's replacing the cobalt?
It is a iron phosphate mix. I am not a chemist. Then more recently we learned that a solar production company that builds solar cells, both thin film and conventional, is also moving to the same facility. They're a little further behind. This was just announced. But I would say pretty confidently by 2024, both of these facilities will have hundreds of employees, and Endicott will, I think, be a lot better off. I will also say that those of us in the environmental movement locally are watching everything like a hawk, as is the DEC, to make sure that the folks in Endicott, whether they're inside the factory or living outside the factory, are going to stay healthy. Because these production processes involve materials you don't want to get out. So, getting back to this, we also have a strong equity provision in this law, which says that 40% of the benefit of this transition must go to disadvantaged communities. Now, before the pandemic started, that was about 40% of New York. A lot higher now. I'm not sure if we have good numbers. It's also going to create thousands of jobs, and we want to make sure that those jobs are equitably distributed. And not least, fossil fuels create a lot of co-pollutants, as they're called, right? We think a lot about greenhouse gases, and that's important. But diesel exhaust, for example, in large quantities causes cancer for people who live downwind of that diesel exhaust. Gas plants, similarly, the NOx and SOx that come off of those, the gases that come off of those plants, cause a lot of asthma, especially in New York City, in our neck of the woods. So there's a lot of negatives that we're hoping to reduce or eliminate, and a lot of positives to introduce. So this is a profile of the major sources of greenhouse gases in New York State. And I think it's important that we remember this is New York State because the profile actually looks different nationally and state to state. In our state, transportation is #1 by a hair, right? And that is a big part of beneficial electrification that I'm not going to talk much about in the presentation. We're mainly focusing on buildings and heat pumps, but I can if you want later. Then buildings is #2, right? And the major problem with buildings is that we burn fossil fuels largely to heat those, right? Methane gas, aka natural gas in cities, and then delivered fuels like oil and propane, sometimes coal, sometimes wood, sometimes kerosene in more rural areas. And I'll just say for myself, I used to burn #2 heating oil until 2008. In 2008, for those of you who owned a home around here, well, anywhere, frankly, at the time, was a pretty nasty time to have #2 heating oil. The price spiked at over $4 a gallon. I think my energy costs all in, electricity and gas, or in oil, was like $7,500 or $8,000 that year. And so I had to do something. And the something that I did was get a whole lot of insulation and a geothermal system. And while it's only now, I think, pretty much paid off, my year-to-year cash flow went from, in a bad year, a saving of only maybe $750 in a year, as opposed to what would have happened if I was still using gas, to as high as almost $2,000 in a year. That's not nothing. So then we have electricity. Now this is often what people think of when they think about the clean energy economy. They think about solar and wind to generate clean electricity, which is obviously important, but as we can see, it's not our biggest greenhouse gas contributor. But it is very important for these two things to be cleaner. Why? Oops, sorry. Why is it important that our electricity production be cleaner in order that transportation and buildings be cleaner? Does anybody know?
Because ultimately cars and buildings will all run on electricity.
I'll say that louder because you're right. Ultimately, everything's going to be running on electricity, cars and buildings. So the cleaner the generation of the electricity is, the cleaner the whole process is, right? What we're going to do by getting rid of internal combustion here, by getting rid of combustion here, is we're going to eliminate point source greenhouse gas production and pollution. So in my house right now, unless I care to fire up my wood stove, nothing gets burned, right? Everything is running on electricity. There's nothing to spill, nothing to deliver, and there's nothing coming out of that smokestack from #2 oil. However, my electricity is coming from somewhere where it's being produced, unless I happen to have solar on my house, which I don't because I live in a forest. But we're lucky in New York. We do have relatively clean electricity, not as clean as it needs to be. But what's the #1 reason that we have relatively clean electricity? Anybody know?
Niagara Falls.
Hydro?
Hydro, yeah, all correct. The New York Power Authority owns major hydro facilities up in that neck of the woods. And that represents, depending on the year, 22, 23, 21% of our fuel mix.
Well, we buy a bunch from Quebec.
What's that?
We buy some.
We sure do, yeah. But in terms of what we produce here, that's a big part of it. As General was mentioning, we also buy hydro from Quebec, depending on what's going on. And then gas and nuclear are the next two. Actually, they're bigger. Nuclear is kind of neck and neck with hydro. Gas has become bigger. But essentially, what we did over the last 10 years, coal went away, right? Pretty much gone. Oil There's still some mixed fuel, gas and oil plants, but that's largely gone too. So really we replaced more of that dirty stuff with gas turbines, gas electricity plants, than we did with solar and wind, though we did grow those things. And that's an issue we'll get to. I won't get in right now to waste and other in industry. They matter, but for the sake of not keeping you here until tomorrow, we will move along. So why is this important? We've already talked about the second largest source of pollution, but one of the important things is we have the technology right now to do this. Cold climate heat pumps, whether they be ground source, geothermal, or air source, which Ellie will tell you about how all that works. The technology exists now to be able to heat and cool our buildings with these technologies. Where would you guess there is the greatest penetration, the greatest use of heat pumps on the planet? What countries? Where? Not here. Just give that one away right now.
Iceland.
What's that?
Iceland.
Iceland. So normally, yeah, I mean, they're pretty good. It is actually Scandinavia, but Iceland has something that not everybody has. They've got a ton of what?
Geothermal.
Very close to the surface. So when we're talking about geothermal, there's sort of two kinds, right? There's what we call the hot rocks geothermal. It's when you think of volcanism, right? You think of heat from the center of the earth being usable to be able to, in essence, boil water and create electricity with turbines. Costa Rica does that a lot. Cornell University is actually going to do that probably. But the kind of geothermal we're talking about in terms of the everyday heating and cooling of most buildings is actually just the heat right there, literally 6 feet under the ground, the earth as a battery. I don't want to steal Ellie's thunder, so I'm not going to say any more about that yet. Renewable energy creates 5 times more jobs than fossil fuels, and actually if you average that out between solar and wind and insulation and heat pumps, those last two create more jobs. And they are by nature local, because you are putting things into buildings. You're changing a building or you are building a new building. That has to, except for prefab, and even with prefab, you have to do it here, right? You can't put in a geothermal well and import it. Whereas with solar, that can actually be done remotely to some degree. Not that it isn't good that we're doing it, but it's really a much more labor-intensive process. As I mentioned, combustion-based heating systems have negative health impacts. We often don't talk enough about that, but the whole field, both of research and of advocacy of environmental justice, which started in earnest in the late 70s and early 80s, really focuses on the fact that, by and large, the most contaminating industries, including energy, tend to be located in low-income communities and especially communities of color. And those negative health impacts are serious, and they're global. So one of the things that the CLCPA seeks to do is flip the script, right? Making it so that the people who are most impacted negatively and has the least power to make decisions about this, you flip that around. All right, so this is going to be my last slide for a bit before I hand it off to Ellie. Why does this matter, environmentally beneficial electrification? I already talked about what it does for the grid, but just as a reminder, right now we have that fuel mix that I mentioned to generate our electricity in New York. It looks different in other states, right? Some states still have a lot of coal. Some states have a lot of wind. What's a state that maybe you wouldn't assume has a lot of wind that has a lot of wind?
Iowa?
Yeah, fair enough, but that's not the one I'm thinking of, because this one is mega.
Utah?
No, you're too north and west. Texas. That bit of Texas that sort of sticks up, not a lot there. There's just wind blasting across the northern Texas plains, and basically they built a big transmission feeder out in the middle of nowhere and put a ton of wind. It is so cheap. I mean, sometimes it's like 1 or 2 cents a watt. Sometimes it's damn near free. And that's the very near future in a lot of ways, because when you think about it, right? If I have a car that runs on gas, or if I have a house that's heated with oil, I've got to constantly replenish that fuel source, right? I got to get more. Whereas if I'm producing electricity with wind or with sun, as long as the wind is blowing or the sun is shining or I've got a battery to store it when it isn't, there's no fuel cost. Fuel is free. So sooner or later, the nature of the energy industry is going to shift from being the profit-making enterprise that it's been in terms of delivering the fuel and profiting from the fuel cycle to I wouldn't be surprised if by the time the younger people in this room are my age, that basically the electricity generating business has become a public service, like water and sewage. Removing point source combustion, we've talked about that. So methane gas, otherwise known as natural gas, if we rewind the tape a little bit back to the 1980s, we didn't have as much gas powering turbines, powering electricity generation, or heating buildings. What happened? What happened in the 90s and early 2000s to change that? Anyone know?
Fracking.
Very good. So one thing that happened was that unconventional gas development, that is, rather than drilling into the ground, finding a pocket of gas that you can bring up relatively easily and cheaply, you had to have a much more involved, much more expensive, much more invasive, much more water-intensive process to, in essence, blast apart fissures in shale deep underneath the ground and use a kind of fluid mix to bring all the bubbles of gas, which add up to a lot of bubbles of gas, up to the wellhead and into a pipeline or storage. That allowed an explosion in gas production in the United States, and there's been a lot of different consequences of that I can talk about in a minute. The other thing that happened is that the gas industry came up with a really nice story. Anyone know what that story is? The story of natural gas as what kind of fuel?
Clean.
Clean. A bridge fuel, right? A bridge fuel allegedly from oil and coal, the nasties, to the wind and the solar that weren't really ready, or so they said. Unfortunately, we found out otherwise. There's a fellow at Cornell University, Bob Howarth, professor there, who's one of the leading researchers in the impact of methane as a greenhouse gas. It's 87 times more powerful than CO2, than carbon dioxide, 87 times. And then you might say, well, when it's burned, it's a heck of a lot cleaner. And that's true. The problem is, if you look at the life cycle of gas from the ground, through the drill, to the wellhead, the pipelines, the processing, and getting it to the point where it's burned, there's significant leakage all through the system. And that's caused a lot of havoc. But at this point, we now are relying on gas for a very significant amount of electricity production and a very significant amount of heating. And it gets better because we found out some things about what else is in methane gas. A lot of the shale actually has some radioactivity in it. And if you live in a tiny apartment in New York City or somewhere, that has impacts. That can make you sick. Gas can also explode if things go wrong. And a lot of our gas infrastructure is considerably older than anyone in this room, sometimes twice as old, the pipes. So there's a lot of reasons to move away from that.
Radioactivity from radon or carbon-14 or both?
Sorry, louder?
The radioactivity from radon or carbon-14 or both?
Depends. Depends on the strata.
Okay.
So I want to move this along a little bit. So quickly, it takes time to do energy efficiency and HVAC retrofits, and it takes a lot of people who know how to do those things. Right now, we're a little short on that latter bit. One of the parts of my job and Ellie's job in addition to coming out and telling people about the benefits of geothermal and energy efficiency, is we can connect you with competitively selected installers that know how to do all this stuff. These people are working way too hard, and there's delays, right? If you today, I want an assessment for my house for energy efficiency and a heat pump, probably can't get that for you until the end of November at best, and probably no work until early in the new year, and that may get worse. And that's because we don't have enough people, and part of that, which we can talk about later if you like, is because of what we've done to the educational system in this country as regards the trades, right? Working with your hands, technical jobs. Well, lastly, geothermal is very cool, as you will hear from Ellie, and air source heat pumps are cool too, but I think geothermal is cooler, because the ground is our battery, right? The sun is coming down on the ground whenever the sun is out and keeping the ground warmer than the air. And so even in the coldest days of winter, you get a boost. Could be 32 degrees, could be 45 degrees, could be 50 degrees, depending on factors. And so you have that free heat, if you will, that is then made into heat that you can use by a process that Ellie will talk about. The way we do things now, when do we need the most electricity in the year? What time of year?
Summer.
Why?
Air conditioning.
Right. So what geothermal can do for us is two things. One is geothermal provides heating and cooling, and the cooling is many times more efficient than standard air conditioning, reducing the summer peak. Also, what's going to happen when we heat a lot of places with geothermal? What's going to happen to our winter electricity demand? It's going to go up, right? And basically that means we're going to even out the necessary base load to a greater degree. And that's really a good thing, because those plants that exist for those peaks are god-awfully expensive, and they're usually not too clean. They're usually gas peaker plants that fire up maybe a day a year, 3 days a year, something like that. And a lot of those will be completely unnecessary. All right, so with that, Ellie, are you there?
I'm here.
Sorry that took so long. You're up. Can you advance, or do you want me to do so?
I can't advance, so I'll ask you to do so.
All right, well, we got the heat pump systems and applications up right now.
Okay, I can see, yeah, I've got the, so next slide is fine. I've got the YouTube live stream up, so I've been watching from there as well.
Okay.
If you could just, if anybody has any questions, I can see the YouTube chat. But also, if you want to just give me a shout, I can hear you guys too. So,
well, that's good. You
stop
can see
me at
that.
any screen.
I can't see the YouTube
Yeah.
chat. All right, fire away.
All right, cool. Well, first of all, hello everybody. My name's Eleanor Fulton. I work with Adam at Nest. I've been here for a little bit, year and a half or so. And I'm also a grad student studying sustainable communities at BU. So finding out ways that we can help make our community as a whole more healthy and more sustainable is kind of what my interest and my passion has been over the last couple of years. And working with Nest, I found my way to air source and ground source heat pumps, which are a really interesting and useful technology, particularly here, that I think not a lot of people know about. So it's really cool to be able to kind of share this information. The point of tonight is, last semester I did a project with a couple other grad students for the Department of Energy. We did a geothermal collegiate competition. And the idea for me and my classmates kind of stemmed from what's a way that we can make kind of bigger changes quickly. You know, every individual that helps and every home that goes on heat pumps and stuff is amazing and so needed. But I was kind of thinking, like, how can we kind of do this on a bigger scale? So hopping into the slide, air source and geothermal heat pumps allow an alternative to fossil fuels, as Adam mentioned. A big place where, you know, you need heating for a lot of buildings all the time is college campuses. So here we've got SUNY Broome, we've got BU, we've got other, you know, living on campus areas that are kind of, people are living and learning in the same space. And that uses a lot of energy. So in this competition, we tried to figure out a way to move the systems to heat pump systems, but in a way that isn't just per single building. I'll tell you why that's significant in just a sec. Adam, if you want to go to the next slide.
We're there.
You are.
Yes.
Okay. It doesn't look like it is on the YouTube.
Yeah, there's a lag, but in the room,
Oh, okay, sure.
we've got it.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I'll just continue then. I wanted to shout out my other teammates because they were so important in this process. We've got Ben Eckstein, who did a lot of the economic analysis with me. We've got John. Oh, there we are. Okay. Who also worked on the community strategy. Cam O'Connor also works with us at Nest now, and then Josh Thumber. They're all really awesome people to work with. So anyway, we were looking at some of New York State's really ambitious energy goals. We're really trying to do good things. By 2050, I think we're trying to get 85% reduced greenhouse gas emissions, which is great, and 70% of its electricity to be from renewable sources. So with these goals, you have to kind of figure out how you can take big chunks of emissions and electricity from non-renewable sources away. And SUNY campuses, which are state-run, are kind of perfect for that. So at first we had thought BU, but it turns out the conditions in the ground are actually better at SUNY Broome, and they already had one building that had been on geothermal energy already. Their Khalees building has been on a geothermal system since 2017. So we were able to use some of their results to kind of gauge energy usage, see how it would be beneficial as the whole campus and whatnot. Next slide, please.
All right, we've got your ground loop is up with the bore field.
Okay, great. Cool. Okay. So basically, after a lot of groundwork assessment, energy usage calculations, we decided that a district geothermal system would be best for SUNY Broome. This picture shows SUNY Broome's campus and the proposed system. This was created by a family friend of Cameron, who was one of our teammates. So the bore field is actually where a big sports field is right now. So which is great because you don't have
a parking lot, I think.
Oh, is it a parking? Are you sure?
Yeah,
okay.
I am sure.
Yeah, we were really torn between parking lot and sports field, because with the parking lot you have to beg for a park. It's the politics of actually making a project like this happen are a lot. But okay, yeah, I think it's weird that it's not a parking lot on here. Maybe I put the wrong version. But anyway, so the bore field, we gauged that there was enough space for all of the wells, and it would turn out to be like something like 650 wells, and each one goes like 450 feet down into the earth to kind of get enough energy for the fluids to circulate for the whole campus to be heated and cooled. So it's a really massive project, but our proposed loop would actually work with all of the buildings that we wanted in it, except for some of the residential dorms. So basically, let me get back into where I was here. We decided that district would be best because SUNY Broome has an asset that allows kind of for increased efficiency, and that asset is the ice rink. So one thing that makes district geothermal loops different than just single building is if you have a diversity of like energy load, so you have different energy needs for it, you can actually make it more efficient, notably in its usage. So if you think about it, just to kind of explain energy load diversity a little bit, if you're thinking about like a neighborhood, all of the homes really only need to be heated from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. while people are at home. Otherwise, they go off to work, they go off to school, don't really need to heat an empty house so much, so you can kind of let it settle. In that neighborhood, you have rows and rows of houses that they all have the same energy needs. So there wouldn't be any benefit to trying to connect them to each other to share some of that load. But as you can see in the picture, all of these buildings are kind of sharing different heating loads. So the red and the blue are both pipelines that have the fluid, the heated fluid that are going to go in between the buildings. And it goes from the bore field into one building, exchanges heat in that building system, and then the cooled liquid goes back into the pipeline and is kind of exchanged and rewarmed, and that goes all the way around. But over by the main pump, where you see that longer stretch of blue, I think, is where, I haven't visited this project in a little bit, but that's where the ice rink is. And during the winter time, and anytime the ice rink is in use, it needs to be cooled all the time. So particularly in the winter, when all these other buildings need heat, they have the heat from the ground, and then they also have that excess heat from the ice rink that otherwise would have just been pumped into the atmosphere. So just reserving that energy and putting it to use instead of just pumping it out makes the system more efficient. So the energy is transferred through a temperature-sensitive fluid. And it said that it goes on a continuous loop, so this system just kind of keeps going, but there's also a lot of, it's like not like pretty new technology, but if you get technology that's on the up and up, it's easy to get data from it, gauge how it's doing. They've had a couple bumps with the Khalees system, but like anything, it's a learning process, and I think that they've, I can bring up the economic assessment if you'd like now, but they have saved a good amount of money. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff about, you know, how it's going to be funded and whatnot, but it could be a really cool and really good thing. And the great part about this is that if we can prove that this is effective on SUNY campuses, it could be kind of a replicable example, like a building block for other campuses across the state, which would help us achieve our goals. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to get into how the systems actually work a little bit. So most heating systems burn fossil fuels to keep you warm. Adam touched a little bit on how it works, but there is heat all around us in the air and in the ground. It's actually, I believe the number is like 10 feet, but 10 feet below the surface or below the freezing point of anywhere really, the ground is at a pretty steady 50 degrees. So you don't have to dig that deep to get there, and it is just kind of stored there. So once you actually put these systems in place, they last a really, really long time. And it's free energy, essentially, so very cool. So looking at the picture on the left, that's kind of what it would look like inside a home, for example. And it's just kind of a closer look. So there are vents up to the house. The heat pump exchanger is down below the surface of the ground, and it goes right into where the wells are, which are those squiggly lines. The fluid goes through the pipes, down through the lower part where there is heat, and then pumped back up through the exchanger into the vents of the house, which is pretty cool. And so, you know, you don't want to keep your house at 50 degrees like ever. That's too chilly. So you just need a rather minimal bit of boost to get it up to a temperature that is comfortable. And you actually, most of you have a heat. Adam, do you want to do this bit? I know this is your favorite bit to do.
All right. So who in this room has a heat pump in their home? Raise your hand. Really?
I can't see
Who
it.
in this room has a refrigerator and a freezer in your home? Yeah. Basically, all that is an insulated box that pumps different amounts of heat out of it, depending on the temperature you want it to be. And so you can think about your refrigerator as your home in the summer. Right? You want to pump heat out of your home. So this one right here, this picture to the left, it's in heating mode. The heat is being pumped into the house. You just reverse it, and you pump the heat out of the house. So basically, the heat sink is the ground. This is a loop field as opposed to wells. When Ellie was talking about the SUNY Broom project, that's more like my house on steroids, deep wells. And the reason you do that is because not everybody has enough space, disturbable space under the ground, near to the top of the ground, to be able to do these. This is cheaper. Yes?
Okay, me and my wife, we have an indoor swimming pool. Is it possible to convert the swimming pool into something like that?
No. So the swimming pool, it's interesting you should raise this, because if you had a big pond, then you could actually make use of that for an open loop system, but it has to be big enough to where it can actually hold the heat and actually stay as a pond during the summer and the winter. If the amount of water is not enough to cover the number of tons of heating or cooling your house needs, it's just not going to work. Now the pool could be heated by a geothermal system, if that's what you meant. Maybe that was what you meant.
Well, unheated, it stays about 55 year-round.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't be nearly big enough to use as part of that system. It would be able to be used in the sense that you could heat it.
How about tying into Shenango Lake?
Potentially. Is that right? Abuts your property?
It's across about, there's a road and it's about
Then no.
maybe 50 feet. away.
Yeah, typically going under roads is a really expensive and annoying business. That's not a technological problem, that is a permitting and political problem. But distance matters, so if there was no road there, then maybe. The other question is, do you have authority to use Shenango Lake for that purpose? So one of the things that we're, whoops, oh my God. We're not going to have time to get into too much, but the biggest barriers that you run into with a lot of these projects, including solar, once you get past the immediate technical needs, is the permitting, the utility, all the other things. But I'm going too far afield as usual. Ellie, do you want to take us back?
Yes, I will. Sorry, my AirPods just died. Can you guys hear me still?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna switch. Stand by for 1 sec. Sorry.
What's the liquid in that loop?
It depends. It can be propylene glycol. It can be, oh gosh. Help me out, Ellie. What are the other common, if you can remember, loop field liquids other than propylene glycol?
You know, I was trying to remember this afternoon, and I was like, I should look this up because somebody's gonna ask.
Actually,
but...
I actually think, no, I'm gonna get it wrong. I'll tell you in a minute. I'll do some judicious Googling while.
Is there
Yeah.
environmental issues if there's a leakage?
Sorry?
Is there environmental issues if there's a leakage?
With the propylene glycol, minimally, but you don't want a leakage. You definitely don't want a leakage. And so these loops are typically made of PVC pipe, and they are typically rated for like 50 or 60 years. And the way they're designed is that the pipe is grouted to the earth. So you have conductivity from the pipe to the earth, if you've got earth. So there's actually, I mean, it's packed in there. But yeah, you definitely want to not have leaks. That's important. Go ahead, Ellie.
Not good. All right, thank you. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, I'll kind of go through these pretty quick and then hand it back over to you. So I just want to touch on that there are different types of heat pumps, and even within the types of heat pumps, there are different, as Adam mentioned, you can have wells versus like loops. So you've got ground source heat pump, which can do space heating and cooling and hot water heating. Then you've got an air source heat pump, and you've got a hot water cooler, or I'm sorry, a heat pump, hot water heater. All of the words that I just said were not what I was supposed to say. So the thing that I like about this sort of technology and this sort of system is that it's like pretty adaptable to your space. So you can have like a really old house, you can have a newer house, you can have ducted, you can have not ducted. There's probably a solution that will be good for your space. So going into the old house though, if you would go to the next slide, the first step that we always mention to people is like insulation and energy efficiency. So making sure that your house is kind of up to par in terms of efficiency, making sure that it's, you're not losing heat from places. This illustration shows a lot of common places where homes lose heat, and then also, you know, where I guess air leaks in your home. So as it says, the cleanest energy is the energy you don't use. It's good to make sure that even for air quality purposes, for safety purposes, your house is kind of up to par. So that's usually the first step, and is a good note in general. There was a clean transition here to why community geo, but reasons that Adam will go ahead and go over with you. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Adam.
Okay. The basic quick version of why community geo, I think Ellie started to talk about, but if you can save money by sharing wells because you have complementary loads, it's a good idea. Meaning that, to really simplify this, say you had a supermarket and you had a small residential apartment building. The residential apartment building works just as Ellie was saying. Most of the heating load is from 5 in the evening to 9 in the morning, but the supermarket needs refrigeration 24/7, 365. So we can move heat out of those freezers into the apartment building, right? And so that's the kind of scenario where if they're close enough together, if you have a place where you can put wells commonly and loop them together, then it's cheaper and more efficient to have a common loop field. Now, this is something that exists much more commonly in Europe and to a degree in Canada than it does here. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move us quickly along to the last, 2 slides. I am going to not go over all of this, but I think a couple of things I'm going to mention. We have a potential of huge increases in federal funding and financing, as well as state funding and financing, or not. It is a purely political matter, and it's very important that this change, because right now the way in which our subsidy system is set up, it favors incumbent fuels. So for example, if I move into a house that's 100 feet or less from a gas main, the utility will connect me up and won't charge me anything. All of us will pay for that a little bit through our rates. But if I want a geothermal system, that's all on me. And there are other such examples. I think the only other thing I'll mention that's really in my mind all the time is we need lots of people, and there are tons of jobs, particularly for the younger people, but not only, mid-career folks as well. There is virtually no limit to the number of jobs for practical purposes that are going to come from this. And so a young person who maybe doesn't want to go straight to college or go to college at all, or only go to a 2-year college and get an associate's, can go to work in a trade that involves dealing with climate, whether it's HVAC or solar or whatnot, and make a good living very early on with no debt. Now, say you want to become an engineer. SUNY Broom has this wonderful new program that they're about to unleash, which is a collaboration with the University of Minnesota. It's actually the University of Minnesota's program, but you get an associate's in engineering, you can get a job as an engineering assistant upon graduation, and you will find that job. They are there. They're desperate. And you can take classes month by month by month, virtually. And so you're making money, and the classes can have a focus on the type of engineering you are working at during the day. And after 2 years, you've got your bachelor's in science and engineering. Nice. We'd like to do that with some other things as well. What can we do? Last slide. Educate ourselves and spread the word. One of the things that we're working on is bringing this sort of information, maybe not at this level all the time, but into our public schools. No state in the country has a comprehensive climate curriculum. That's a big problem. Energy is a big part of it, and so there are many different fields, many different disciplines, and if a young person knows why math matters at the age of 12, because they're interested in being an engineer, because they want to be able to design systems like this, that might be a motivation and make a good living, as opposed to, why do I need this math? That's how I was. Get an energy assessment. It's a good idea to know about your building, whether it's where you work or your home. I obviously did that. You learn an awful lot about your house. And if you want to do something, you do something, right? There's financing available. And teach and learn about climate-friendly jobs, even if you're not in the education field. You know about this sort of thing, share it with your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, your uncles, your aunts, and advocate for and support environmentally beneficial laws, regulations, programs, and standards at various levels. So with that, I'm going to open up a lot later than I had promised to any questions that you have or any discussion.
So, as I understand, electric vehicles are somewhat subsidized currently by the government?
So electric vehicle purchases, yeah, there are subsidies available. They're actually a relatively low ebb right now. They need recharging. One thing to keep in mind, how much do you suppose we pay to keep the interstate highway system running? I don't actually know that number, but it's in the high billions or trillions. That is basically the subsidy that we've all paid since the 1950s to create a system that favors the passenger automobile and the long-haul truck, right? Once upon a time, we had trains. We don't have a lot of trains for people anymore. Once upon a time, when the car was first being developed, we had electric cars. That was not a technological choice that we chose to go with oil and gasoline, right? So in terms of the subsidy, as a practical matter for me, I want an all-electric vehicle. I can't afford one right now, so that matters as far as access. But one of the ways we find the money is we take the current way in which we motivate people to use existing technologies and existing fuels and flip it. Other questions? Yes. Actually, we'll go front and back. Go ahead.
So, talking about switching over to entirely renewables by 2040s, 2050s, and that, as you were saying, changing the energy industry over to being a public service or public good, like water.
That's just my prognostication, but yeah, go on.
How do we convince the people who make their money from that to actually do it?
I think the main people that stand to be the losers as time goes by are first and foremost the companies that live off of delivered fuels like oil and propane. I worry about Marabido. I'll just come out and say that. They're a very important company in our town. And delivering propane and oil is just not going to be a thing in a few decades. After that, gas, methane gas. Those systems have to be drawn down. And then the other losers could be the utilities. That's going to be the really hard-fought battle. Because I think that even...
Are they fighting stuff like this?
That's a complicated question. I mean, the utilities want to be able to maintain the existing model. In this state, they're basically a unregulated state, which means that, strangely enough, they can't own generation. So NYSEG, for example, which is our investor-owned utility here, they buy power from companies that sell it, and they transmit it where it needs to go, and they maintain the poles and wires. Historically, they make money by investing in that system. But we need them to invest in changing the system so it favors beneficial electrification, and they can't always make money from that, particularly if one line of business is gas. So, for NYSEG, they stand to win on the electric side. They stand to lose on the gas side. And the other issue is that while they are willing to make certain things happen, they're unwilling to make other things happen. And a lot of us spend a lot of our time, waste a lot of our time fighting with them. So there is legislation that probably won't go anywhere for a few years that would eliminate them in favor of the New York Power Authority. Politically, it's a very long shot right now. But bad things have been happening in the world. It does tend to change the political calculus every time we have another disaster. Yes, ma'am.
Just two comments. Just number one, in terms of there's going to be more renewable energy type jobs, I think it's important to also note that the renewable energy type jobs are safer for the person who's working them compared to the fossil fuel energy. So there's a far greater occupational hazard to the worker than the fossil fuel. So I think that's just an important point to know, that you can be working in a safer environment.
That's very true.
Versus going into the coal mine. And the second thing is New York part of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative? So
full marks.
What was that?
I said full marks. That's a very, very nerdy piece of knowledge. Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. So, Pennsylvania is trying to get into this initiative. So it's a cap and trade program, right? That you're ultimately, fossil fuel industry needs to purchase carbon credits. So you basically, over time, you're able to encourage these places to decrease the amount of carbon dioxide that they're emitting. You're making money from it, and in Pennsylvania, they're trying to pass legislation to say that the money that's generated from this is actually going to go to places where there's environmental justice issues. So if you're out in Allegheny County and you're working for a coal industry, coal power plant, and that's going to shut down, typically what happens is they shut down, and all the people that are there working at the coal industry just lose their job, and the town is devastated. But now with this RGGI initiative, you earn the money, and Pennsylvania wants to have that money go to those specific areas just to help with the development of new jobs and also environmental justice issues in our state.
So you've raised a host of super important issues. It's referred to as a just transition, right? So folks in coal country and now frankly in gas country in places like Pennsylvania, these jobs will cease to exist before long, and we can't just let people who are working day to day, they didn't create these industries and they're not destroying these industries, but they and their towns rely on them. And so in New York, at least, we're trying to find ways to transition both the people and the places from where they're at to where they need to be. That is not easy. I mean, when you think about workers, there's basically three kinds. There's the ones that are old enough that you can give them a damn good severance package and they can take early retirement and choose to retire or not. Then there are people that might follow that company either to another state or another career. And then there's everybody else. There's the people that are going to stay there, that are going to need jobs there. And a lot of these jobs, coal mining is not a pleasant job, but it pays pretty well. Drilling, being an oil rig worker is dangerous AF. Also make a lot of money. And so we need to make sure that we're not trading people jobs where they're pulling down, $40, $50 an hour for jobs where they're pulling down 25 or 30. And again, that's not a super simple thing to do, but it's very important. And one of the ways you get big chunks of money is basically through various forms of polluter penalty. But there too, you have to be careful. What you don't want to end up happening is for poor people to pay the bill when it gets passed down to them. There's ways in which that can be done, and there's a Climate Community Investment Act that seeks to do just that. Basically, every fossil fuel as it enters the state of New York would pay a fee, anyone who's doing that. And for people who are low and moderate income, they would actually be getting cash in order to offset any price increases they may suffer from. And for the rest of us, we have incentives to move off of fossil fuels, so we wouldn't get hit by that anymore because we'd be driving electric and we'd be living electric. Other questions?
Yeah, question about where stuff comes from. My understanding is that the bulk of the solar panels come from China. And
Your understanding is correct.
And the bulk of lithium comes from...
Thanks for coming, folks. Thank you.
And the bulk of lithium comes from places like Chile and Australia.
Bolivia is the biggest, but never mind. It's from outside of the U.S., yeah.
So is that a concern as well?
Yes, it is. So I was actually sitting in a room yesterday with some economic development. Wait, was it yesterday? No. Yes. Today? No, Wednesday. Anyway, the point is that there is a company called Ubiquity Solar that's moving into the IBM facility. And what they pointed out is that increasingly, especially public sector, but not only public sector companies, really don't want to be seen as being involved with greenhouse gas producing stuff. Now, Chinese manufacturers have to ship their stuff all the way from China. They also don't necessarily have the best labor practices, or in the manufacture of those solar panels, they're often using coal.
Yeah, they make a bit of a mess just making them.
All of those things are true. And so what this company is betting on is creating a very, very efficient production line in Endicott and being able to produce something at a price point that the federal government, the state government, companies will pay maybe a little bit more because they'll be able to say, this is clean. This is really clean.
Right.
It's not clean tech minus all the crap that it took to get us here. But yeah, no, those are very important points. I mean, part of the reason why the United States is in trouble in this regard with manufacturing is that, especially China, but not only China, most of East Asia and most of Europe are a lot more aggressive in incentivizing and supporting their manufacturing industries than we have been. And so, the silicon solar cell was invented in New Jersey, was first deployed in Manhattan. But as you say, we produce hardly any of it. If you look at heat pumps, the gold standard for heat pumps are companies like Fujitsu and Mitsubishi. Those are amazing heat pumps. A lot of that technology got developed here initially. So we have a number of issues we need to resolve. Anything more? I know it's getting late and the skies are... How are the skies?
Last I checked, they were good. We were
Okay.
looking at Saturn and Jupiter out there, so hopefully there's still shine through.
Why don't we wrap formally, and I can hang around for the few and the brave that are sticking around here. And I just want to thank you, Jeremy, for setting up this very fine and complex system
Yes.
so we could bring Ellie to us. And
Well, thank
good
you.
night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with the paper.
Thanks. I need it. Bye.
Find out what's in those pipes.